On second reading, House Bill 4623. Clerk, read the bill.
HB number 4623 by Little, relating to liability of public schools and professional school employees for certain injuries to students.
Mr. Little.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, happy to have the opportunity to lay out House Bill 4623. How dare you? It begins. Chairman Guerin, is this appropriate? Where is Chairman Guerin? Oh, okay.
Move passage. It is appropriate under the House rules for the member's first bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members, we have a sexual abuse crisis in our public schools in Texas. It's indisputable and we can't look away. In 2019, this chamber established a mandatory educator misconduct reporting portal. Between September 21st of 2021 and July of 2024, there were 52,782 total complaints recorded against Texas educators. These complaints are expressed in one spreadsheet that's organized by House district. The House printing office printed it for me for $60. It's 1,533 pages long, and it's right over there by my desk on the House floor. In the last 3 years, there were 6,888 reports of sexual and violent misconduct by public school employees against our students in the state of Texas. As of July 2024, 6,654 of these allegations were left unresolved. 44,349 educators have been flagged as do not hire in the state of Texas, yet enforcement actions remain either inconsistent or non-existent at all. House Bill 4623 purports to remove sovereign immunity from our school districts for certain acts and omissions by their employees that constitute crimes of sexual misconduct.
Mr. Leach, for what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield just for a quick couple questions?
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
I do yield for questions.
All right.
The gentleman yields for questions.
Thank you, Representative Little. So we've been discussing here at the back mic. We know this is your first bill, and you're appropriately so surrounded by your classmates. We're going to ask that you oblige us that your hazing is going to come tomorrow on third reading. And we've all agreed to that, because this bill is a serious bill. Every bill on this floor is a serious bill, but it's important that we not make light of this situation. And so you're going to get your hazing tomorrow, if that's
I do
okay.
consent, Chairman Leach. Thank you for your cooperation and help with this bill.
So, members, this bill, and members, you could stay up there with them. You don't have to leave, even though we're not going to haze them. Representative Little, I want you to go ahead with your opening. This is some of the same information you shared with us in our committee hearing, and I want to make sure that the members are paying attention to exactly what you're talking about here.
Thank you so much, Chairman Leach. We now cannot go in Texas one single week without learning of a new act of sex abuse against a child in our public schools. These are euphemistically referred to as an improper relationship between a student and an educator. That is not what this is. What this bill does is it's going to create joint and several liability between the school employee and the school district itself, and it's going to provide for recovery of actual damages and attorney's fees. 38,778 cases were reported but never even formally opened for investigation in the state of Texas. We must do better. We can do better. This bill will allow the courts some ability to at least balance these harms and address the harms that are occurring in our public school system.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Gentleman yields for questions.
All right. Thank you, Representative Little, for bringing this important bill. So just to be clear, we're talking about educator misconduct here, correct?
Correct. By any public school employee.
And your bill has created joint and several liability for school districts as the employer, but also for the employees who are actually engaged in the misconduct.
Correct. I believe Representative Hinojosa has an amendment to narrow the scope of this somewhat, but yes, the original bill, it creates joint and several liability as between the school district and the violating public school employee.
Okay, well, I'm fully in support of this and appreciate you bringing this bill. I think that Texas is one of the first states in the country, if we and when we pass this into law, to do something like this. I think some other states are advancing legislation on the same front, but I believe that strongly that if Texas does this, other states are going to follow suit. One of the concerns that many of us have heard from our school districts, and I don't think it's an illegitimate concern, you and I've talked about it, is just the financial stability of a school district. So in my area, representing 10 school districts, all of whom are rightfully concerned about cracking down on educator misconduct, but also their financial status. One lawsuit, as you know, can in many cases result in not only actual damages of thousands and thousands of dollars, but if not on top of that, hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional damages. And so for school districts that are already struggling financially, what is your response to them as the author of the bill in terms of how school districts can plan for this potential liability and prepare for it?
I think they will absolutely have to address this through an insurance policy and insure against the loss or potential risk through errors and omissions policy, likely, and just like private schools and other organizations do.
Well, Representative Little, I appreciate you bringing this. You've had a hell of a first session, and this is a great, great first bill. I'm normally a less lawsuit guy, more tort reform, but I will tell you that when it comes to protecting our children and cracking down on child abuse and educator misconduct, if we need lawsuits to do that, then I say bring the lawsuits on. And so thank you for bringing this bill, Representative Little.
Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Wally, for what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, would Representative Little?
The gentleman
for a
yield
few
for questions.
I certainly will.
The gentleman yields for questions.
Representative Little, we spoke briefly earlier today about some of the experiences we had in our district with this horrendous crime to children and the victims of this crime. And I guess my question to you would be, would this bill help deter future crimes committed by these bad actors on these poor children?
Thank you for your question, Representative Wally. I think there's no question that the bill will create a deterrent effect. I think right now there's not enough incentive for school districts in the state of Texas to solve the problem because they will always be immune from suit until they are not. I had a lengthy conversation with Representative Wharton. There was a week in, I believe, the month of March of this year where they had 4 of these cases in 1 week. Improper relationship with a student, solicitation of a prostitute by a school employee, another case of improper relationship with a student. These are grievous crimes that are being committed by public school employees. Almost all of our teachers and public school employees are wonderful people. The problem is we do not have the necessary tools to rein in this problem. The state of Texas has made it obvious that these problems are going to persist unless we do something about it.
And with your bill, you believe that this would hold these evil people and bad actors accountable, is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. And we need a mechanism for accountability through the court system where victims and their families are denied access to the courts currently.
And it wouldn't be fair for this trauma, for of this bad act, that type of trauma shouldn't be, we shouldn't have any mechanism to correct or mitigate some of the issues that come about with these horrible crimes. And this is what your bill is trying to correct.
Yes, Representative Wally. Right now we have a harm without a remedy, and we heard from many people who had been sexually abused by public school employees here in the state of Texas at the committee hearing on this matter. They're horrific, and we have to have a way to address it. This gives us one tool.
And I don't want to go back to law school, but we're going to have to go back to law school because you mentioned joint and several liability. What does that mean so that the public is aware about the ramifications of passing your bill? Because you have ramifications for the institution and the schools, and obviously there are some legitimate concerns regarding that. And as Chairman Leach mentioned, the financial implications. But what does that mean to the average person so that the public is aware about if we pass this bill? And I'm going to support the bill. What are those ramifications?
Great question. So joint and several liability is a form of vicarious liability. So you have the person, the individual public school employee who creates the harm against the victim in the public school, and
Correct.
the school district is going to become vicariously liable for the same damage that is caused by its employee. We have principles in law that address this, a principle called respondeat superior, where you have principal is responsible for the agent's conduct that occurs during the course and scope of employment. We're trying to address problems that are occurring either on school grounds or off school grounds by a relationship that was created in the school district. The problem is that if you don't like going to a private school, you can leave. If you don't like going to a business and someone there makes you uncomfortable, you can leave. These families who are sending children to school expecting their children to be safe from these types of quote-unquote improper relationships have no choice, and they also have no access to the school system. And Representative Wally, I appreciate your support.
And in law school and criminal law, you learned about strict liability offenses in criminal law. What does the strict liability apply in these cases?
It does as the bill is currently situated. So the school district will be responsible for its employees. We have a similar principle in what I'll call premises liability cases in Texas. So if you own a building or a parking lot and you know that crime is going on there and it is readily foreseeable to you, you're responsible to make sure that your facility doesn't cause harm to other third parties, whether through the criminal acts of people who work for you or not. And so I believe if you look at that stack of paper over there to your right, Representative Wally, this is about as foreseeable as it gets in the state of Texas. We know that there are people in our schools who are abusing our kids, and we need a remedy. And I think this provides us one way at it.
Okay. And so under normal, on the civil side, separate from the criminal side, on the civil side, when you file a cause of action, there are certain standards that you have to meet. This one's different though, right? Because of the strict liabilities. It's not normal negligence. This was, I mean, once you are aware that somebody is committing this type of evil crime, you will be strictly liable. Is that how I understand it?
That's how the bill is currently drafted, and Representative Hinojosa has an amendment that will touch on this issue, and I encourage you to stay tuned to that.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Representative Wally.
Senator Host, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
Gentleman yield for questions.
I do.
He yields for questions.
Representative Little, you and I have talked about this bill a lot. Just to clarify, this bill waives sovereign immunity, but it also goes to strict liability for the school district, which means even if the school district as the employer does everything right and still, unfortunately and terribly, something happens to a child and the child is sexually abused by an employee, that school district is still strictly liable, even if they've done their due diligence, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Is there anywhere else that we have in law strict liability for an employer when the employee commits a crime?
Yep. So negligence per se, when you're engaged in a crime, for example, if you are running a red light, breaking the law, where the harm that is caused to the victim is also in conjunction with a legal violation. It's the situation that's most analogous to this one. We also have a similar situation with premises liability. That's why I kind of analogized to that earlier. You see these cases in civil courts with rundown buildings or dark parking lots where there have been rapes, robberies, murders. Once you know that there's a foreseeable risk of harm on that property, you are now kind of responsible for ensuring that you perform your duty of care in taking care of visitors to that property.
Right, but still a requirement of a duty of care, and and here though, even if you achieve your duty of care or your due diligence or your background check, whatever it is that is the standard duty of care for an employer, and I don't know what that is. I would assume it's a background check. Even still, you would be liable under your bill as it is currently written, though you and I have talked about an amendment.
That's right, and we have talked about an amendment. One of my concerns is that the school district will always say, well, we ran a background check. Well, we didn't know Coach Johnson was a problem when they very much did. We've all been around kids. We've all been around schools. and everyone knows who the bad actors are, but the schools just don't have enough. They don't have enough incentive to get rid of these people.
There's criminal liability, though.
For
Is that
whom?
correct?
For whom?
Well, isn't there criminal liability for non-reporters?
Yes. If you
That-
know about abuse, not if you suspect abuse, if you know about abuse.
Okay, your background and purpose in your bill analysis is interesting to me because it refers to an educator misconduct reporting portal administered by the TEA. And this is supposed to be the rationale for the bill. And it says that a majority of these reports were left unresolved. And this is in the time frame of July 2024. Had not heard about this educator misconduct reporting portal. Can you elaborate on what this is?
Yes, these are just atmospherics for the bill. My understanding is that this legislature required the creation of this educator misconduct reporting portal. And since this body decided to create this vehicle for information has begun to accumulate in it, and we now know more than ever about what's going on in our public schools from a misconduct standpoint. There's a book that was put out by an organization called Texas Education 911, and out of the reports that have been categorized in this educator misconduct portal, 10% of the reports are sexual in nature, 1% sexual harassment, 13% inappropriate relationship with a student, in addition to other violent types of offenses or by the public school employee.
And I am familiar with this 911 group, but isn't there a big complaint that the agency has dropped the ball on these allegations of sexual abuse, that the agency is not doing its part to address these allegations and these complaints?
That is one complaint, but I think you'll appreciate that there are two ends of this system that are attached by this conveyor belt of information going back and forth. So the school districts are required to report information to the TEA. TEA is obligated to investigate it. If they investigate it, the school district is still obligated to action that. The TEA doesn't action it. So fundamentally, I would say we have a problem that the reports of abuse that are going back and forth between the TEA and the school district are never getting fully addressed. These matters are not getting resolved, and we need, I think, access to the court system to resolve them.
They're dying at the TEA, and so it seems appropriate to me that the liability should be on the state, that we should be suing the state for not taking action with the sexual misconduct complaints that it has within its possession that it's not acting on.
I understand that's your position. That's not what the bill addresses.
Okay, is that something you would support doing?
It depends on what the circumstances are, but that's not the point of this bill.
Okay. Who pays these judgments if the school district is held liable for sexual misconduct by
I anticipate the
an
school district
employer?
will be required to. I would expect that any diligent school district would go out and insure against this loss.
Ultimately taxpayers pay it, right?
I would expect their insurance company to pay that. I would expect taxpayers through the school district to pay the premium.
That's correct. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Raymond, for what purpose?
would the gentleman yield for a couple of questions?
Gentleman yield for questions.
Absolutely.
Yields for
Thank you,
questions.
Representative. No trick questions. I told you I would vote for this bill, and I'm going to. But I do want to ask you, do you know or are you aware of any other state that has passed a bill or a law similar to this?
I do. I can name them for you. Just a moment.
Sure.
Pennsylvania, North Carolina, California, Michigan, Maryland, New York.
And in recent years, or have they been around for a while, do you know?
2019, 2018, 2023. This is a recent development. I think, Representative Raymond, when you and I were kids going to school, more things were tolerated, fewer things were talked about. Now these things are coming into public view, and I think the problem is getting worse.
And in these states, I want to get to figuring out how we can actually do more to stop what you're trying to stop, what I think all those standing there and I and others would like to stop. So I'm trying to figure out the best way. So in my mind, what I think is that the deterrent for those who would do these things is more likely to be more severe punishment, if you will, because if we pass this, it becomes law. I think the perpetrator, if I can call him that, is likely to not be swayed too much by the fact that the school district for which they work may be sued for $1 million or $2 million or whatever it is, right? Maybe less. But you see where I'm going with it? Is that trying to figure out how we can most effectively, maybe that's the right way to say it, most effectively address this. And so since you've seen that other states like Pennsylvania and New York have passed laws similar to this, have they done other things with reference to on the penalty side?
As far as a criminal penalty?
Yes.
Well, I
I don't know what other kind there could be.
I couldn't speak to the criminal penalties in all of those states.
Hold
but
on, Ms. Speaker, could you bang the
Sorry.
gavel a little bit, please?
Sorry.
I can't, it's a little.
Members, please take your conversations outside the rails.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Representative Raymond. I couldn't speak to the criminal penalties in all of those states. Here's what I would tell you based upon my experience in dealing with people who are serious sexual offenders, is they typically have between 10 and 13 victims on average. They are typically so compulsive that they are offending against.
Ms. Time has expired.
Thanks, Speaker.
The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Hinojosa.
Ms. Hinojosa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I don't think there's anybody in this body who thinks sexual misconduct in our schools is okay. It's horrific. We need to do everything we can to stop it. But sometimes it happens. It happened when I was on the school board at Austin ISD, and it is a punch in the gut. It is devastating to school communities, and I can't even imagine what it means to the families who experience it. But this bill, in my opinion, goes too far. This bill not just waives sovereign immunity, which is the protection that government has from lawsuit, because in the end, taxpayers end up paying for those lawsuits. It not only waives that, but it holds the school district strictly liable. Again, as I said in the questioning, what that means is that even if the school district did everything right, background checks, due diligence hiring, and all of the responsible things it should be doing in the supervision of the employment of its employees, it would be held liable with no cap in the amount of damages that the plaintiffs could collect against the school district, which is, again, against the taxpayer ultimately. The bill does limit it to actual damages, right? But again, there's no cap on those damages. So what my amendment does is it puts into the bill a requirement that the school district act with negligence in its either hiring or supervision of the employee, and then it caps the amount that the plaintiff can collect in a lawsuit at $250,000. The reason for the $250,000 cap is based on a similar cap in what is the Texas Torts Claims Act, which is based on Section 101.023 of the Government Liability Torts Claims Act, which states that state government, it's maxed out at $250,000, local government is maxed out at $100,000, and a municipality at $250,000. These are examples of caps that are on different forms of government when liability is waived. So that's what I looked to figure out what would be the appropriate cap in this case. And with that, I urge your support and I move adoption.
Following amendment to the amendment, the clerk will read the amendment to the amendment.
Amendment by Little.
Mr. Little.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members, and thank you to Representative Hinojosa for bringing this amendment to me early so we could have a discussion in earnest about it. I am okay limiting the scope of liability to negligent hiring, supervision, or should probably be retention, or employing a public professional school employee. I think that is a reasonable limitation on the potential liability in the bill. The thing that I'm not okay with, and I'm asking you to stay with me on, is amending the cap on damages to $500,000 and not $250,000. If the damage cap is at $250,000, it'll be very difficult to find the right attorney to represent potential victims in these cases. $500,000 is a bargain for the harm that is absolutely caused by these types of really rapes, improper relationships between students and educators. These children will be living with a lifetime of trauma. And keep in mind that if we're talking about equalizing public schools and private schools in this state, there is no cap on liability in private schools. There is no sovereign immunity that they enjoy. And I'm going to ask you to help us put it on an even footing and set a reasonable damages cap at $500,000 and accept my amendment to Representative Hinojosa's amendment.
Ms. Hinojosa on the amendment to the amendment.
I appreciate Representative Little being supportive of the amendment. The $250,000 cap is based on statute that currently exists. I'm just going to leave it to the will of the House.
Members, this is a record vote on the amendment to the amendment. Clerk, ring the bell. Show Mr. Leach voting aye, Ms. Luther voting aye, Mr. Little voting aye. Mr. Schatzline voting aye. Have all members, Mr. Rowles voting aye. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? 123 ayes and 9 nays. The amendment to the amendment is adopted. Ms. Hinojosa on the amendment as amended. It's acceptable to the author. Is there objection? Chair hears none. The amendment is accepted. Mr. Little to close.
Thank you, Mr.
Hold on.
Speaker.
There's another amendment. Following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment. Is Mr. Toth on the floor of the House?
Amendment by Toth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this simply codifies in Family Code Section 261.01 that if a district is guilty of abuse, or they will be held liable, and it's acceptable to the author.
Mr. Toth sends up an amendment. It's acceptable to the author. Is there objection? Chair hears objection. Mr. Wally, for what purpose? Mr. Wally, for what purpose?
With the gentleman yield, I know we have a motion to accept it, but I just want to get the little more information on the amendment.
Mr. Toth, will you yield for questions?
It's not germane. It's not germane. Let me go see if
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Wu, for what purpose?
I raise a point of order against further consideration of the TOPA amendment on the grounds that the amendment is not germane to the bill.
Bring your point of order down.
It adds another layer to it. It adds another layer of sexual misconduct. He's got abuse or neglect and failure.
The amendment has been withdrawn. Mr. Little? And the point of order is withdrawn. Mr. Little to close.
I was going to ask him a question.
Me too.
Oh, go ahead.
Mr. Speaker,
Jones, for what purpose?
will the gentleman yield?
Gentlemen yield for questions.
Representative Little,
I will.
I'm sorry. Does the gentleman yield for questions?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Mr. Little, may I ask why this bill doesn't extend to private schools that receive voucher money?
Because they're not immune from suit. In fact, I've sued some of them.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Waller, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield just for a few questions?
Gentlemen yield for questions.
Representative Little, as you close, now that we're back on the bill as amended, the Representative Hinojosa's amendment, what did that do?
It changed the scope of liability from strict liability on
I'll stop you there, right? Because we talked about strict liability.
We did.
In our earlier discussion. That was a much higher standard. Is that my understanding?
By higher standard, you mean much
A more stringent.
lot tougher on the school district.
Very tough on the school district.
Very tough.
Okay.
This is still tough, but it's not as tough. It's going to require the victim to demonstrate that the ongoing employment, hiring, retention, supervision of that employee was negligent, and that the school district breached a duty of care in continuing to either hire or employ that person.
Okay. So we went from strict liability, where it's very onerous on the employer,
Correct.
meaning the school district,
Correct.
to in the normal civil process to a negligence standard.
Yes.
Okay. And then the initial cap was 250, and it was raised to 500,000.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Wally.
Mr. Speaker,
Moody, for what purpose?
will the gentleman yield for a couple questions?
Gentlemen yield for questions?
Certainly.
Yields for questions.
All right, thank you. Kind of in line with Mr. Wally, just trying to understand where we're landing now that everything's gone through amendment. And as your bill came to the floor, there were no caps included in the bill. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And with her amendment, as amended by your amendment, there is now a cap in the bill?
That's right, and it's more in line with the Texas Tort Claims Act. First, some of those claims in the Texas Tort Claims Act are capped at $500,000 per incident or occurrence.
Okay, does it still leave us with the discrepancy between private schools and the public schools as how they're defined in your bill?
Not in my belief, so this is a little bit off in the weeds, but most private schools are organized as charitable organizations, and we have charitable immunity in Texas where total damages are capped at $500,000, and we can debate whether that's right or wrong. I certainly would like to at some point in this chamber, but that is the current state of the law.
And we actually discussed this in committee, right? In
Yes.
trying to figure out the proper place to land here. So I just want to say that I appreciate you trying to merge those things in an equitable way, because when we're talking about this conduct, we may have that further discussion, and I hope we do at some point, because we're talking about egregious conduct. But I am glad that we've gotten to a point where we are creating an equitable lane between both. If there's violations in either sector, that we're going to make sure that we hold people accountable to the same degree, and I appreciate you working on that.
Speaker Moody, if you found me to be reasonable, don't tell anyone.
Move passage. Move passage. Move passage.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Thank you, members. Just want to briefly thank Texas Education 911 and Eileen Blickowski and Jaco Boyens Ministries and Tammy Brown Rodriguez, Citizens Defending Freedom, Texas Eagle Forum, and Amy Lynn. I move Passage.
Question occurs on passage to engrossment. This is a record vote. Clerk, ring the bell. Mr. Leach voting aye, Ms. Luther voting aye, Mr. Little voting aye.
So proud of you.
Mr. Wally voting aye. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? 127 ayes and 6 nays. House Bill 4623 passes to engrossment. Members, the Speaker's desk is clear.